This is Big Ten Today, presented by Gatorade. Raphael Davis and Mike Hall here with you in our Chicago studios. We've got a ton to get to, plenty on Caitlin Clark, a special retrospective piece on her career in just a little bit, and we've got a crew out in Phoenix. But first things first, it is Championship Monday.
Yes.
Your alma mater is on the line. How are you feeling right now, Raphael?
Oh, it felt great to wake up and be a Boilermaker. I mean, I put on pants, and I never put on jeans unless I'm wearing a suit. So I'm looking forward to seeing Purdue coming out, playing hard. You look at Coach Painter. He wasn't even born the last time Purdue was in the NCAA championship game. He's earned it. He deserves this. He's done it the right way. Shout out to the Boilermakers. It's time to see who gets it done.
At first, I thought you were just bragging you put on pants.
No, I never wear pants.
I was like, listen, any accomplishment is a good accomplishment if you're proud of it.
Just felt good about myself.
Quite an accomplishment for Purdue to make it all the way to the national championship game. Remember last year, of course, that horrible upset for them in the 116 matchup. They've already avenged that. They're back in, only 40 minutes away from a national championship. Keep in mind, this is the 9th team for the Big Ten to make it to a national championship matchup since 2000, when Michigan State last won, the 7th different Big Ten program. State Farm Stadium is where the action will happen and where the Boilermakers will try to give the league their first crown in nearly a quarter century. Dave Revson is on site with our friends.
Mike, thanks, and welcome to the desert on a much anticipated Monday. Dave Revson, Mike DeCourcy, Andy Katz. You really couldn't ask for a better matchup than this, guys. These have been the two best teams in college basketball all season, and tonight, Andy, we get to see them play for a national championship.
It almost never happens. We have the two best teams, the 2-1 seeds, two teams that I don't know if they have numbers, but it feels like they were number one for the most part of the season.
12 of 20 weeks.
So that is certainly more than 50%. We also
actually,
yeah. Math was not my strong suit. We also have, and this is very rare, my historian to my right, we've got the Naismith Coach of the Year, Dan Hurley. We've got the Naismith Player of the Year, Zach Edey. That almost never happens playing in this championship game. We've got a program that won the title last year, one that is seeking its first, both historically good in the regular season, at times in the postseason. So it builds up to be an epic final, and I hope we get it.
When there are you start the NCAA tournament, you get the bracket, and people start looking at teams, and they've had great years. And there are certain qualities that every champion has had for basically the last 4 decades, especially the last 2.5 since we got Ken Pomeroy's great statistics, offensive and defensive efficiency. Every champion just about meets these characteristics. And people still pick teams that don't meet those characteristics, and they usually lose their brackets. But this is a championship game with two teams that fit the qualifications. Do they have first-round picks? Zach Edey's going to be a first-round pick. Connecticut has a couple. Are they top 20 offense and defense? They are. So they have all the quality. So you have two teams that are, one of them is going to fit like a champion. We don't have can they do it? Can they break the mold? No, these are the mold.
And if you're going to go down the Ken Pom trail, I mean, we have 1 versus 2 in
right.
Ken Pom, right? So these are, by efficiency measures, the two best teams in the country. It sets up to be an absolutely epic championship game, and we're going to spend a lot of time here over the next hour breaking it down. But I want to talk about the significance from Purdue's point of view. I mean, look, we are here to cover Purdue. We know how good this program has been, and this is something that I've been saying for a while now. We know that Purdue has the most Big Ten championships of any school. I think if you ask nationally, people who even are college basketball fans but don't follow the Big Ten like we do, I don't know that they'd come up with Purdue first. I think most people probably would come up with Indiana, maybe even Ohio State for those who are real students of the game. But obviously the answer is Purdue. And so what can this day do for Purdue and its perception nationally?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, a lot of college basketball has been for a long time about breaking narratives. Sometimes I think it's about social media, but it's really not, because I go back to the 90s when Jim Calhoun couldn't win the big one, and then he did. So they've already done a lot of that work now. But this is an opportunity to win a championship. Only so many teams over the course of the 90-plus years of the NCAA tournament have gotten into this position. This is a chance for the Boilers to win a title, to hang that banner, to be one of those teams that has done it. And sometimes people say, well, the pressure's more on UConn because they're expected to win. They're the favorite to win. But I think the pressure is distributed equally among the players on both sides because this is their chance to win it. This is an opportunity. I know some of the UConn guys already have rings, but there are enough of them that weren't part of that team. I really believe that this is about opportunity. This is our chance, if you're a Boiler, to win it all.
Yeah, it's crazy. I mean, first of all, there were only two other games that they weren't favored to win. That was at Illinois and Arizona Indy, which I'm surprised to learn. But this is the first game that I can think of this season that they're not expected to win. Reaching this point, I do think cancels a lot of the past narratives. But you cannot ignore what happened in March the last 3 seasons. You know, that they played. Obviously, you include when they didn't in the pandemic year. But Little Rock, the St. Peter's loss to me really looms larger because they had a week to prepare for St. Peter's. That was in the Sweet 16 in Philadelphia. And then last year with the loss to FDU. As great as Matt Painter's staff and Purdue have been in the regular season, the Big Ten tournament, you can't ignore because so many coaches and staffs and programs are judged on March. I think they have erased that for what they've accomplished by getting to this championship game in the manner in which they did, you know, beating quality teams along the way. There was no handouts here. Going through Tennessee, even though NC State was 11, look what NC State did to get here, and it is still an ACC team. So I think they've canceled a lot of that by getting to this championship game.
Yeah, it would have been nice to not have the best team in the country as your opponent, right? And I do think that becomes the challenge, and we've seen this with the Big Ten. I mean, we all know Michigan State in 2000, the last Big Ten team to win the national championship. This will be the 8th chance since then for the Big Ten. All 8 have gone up against #1 seeds. So as we kind of expand our viewpoint more so from the Big Ten's point of view than simply from Purdue's, what does this day mean for the Big Ten?
Yeah, you know, I think, again, it goes into that narrative idea. The Big Ten, as you mentioned, has been in this circumstance so many times, which means they're playing good basketball. They're having good teams. They're producing great players and great entertainment during the course of the regular season, but they haven't won it. So it's something for, and there are a lot of them out there, Big Ten opponents, to bash the Big Ten with. It's sitting out there, and it's an easy tool. And if Purdue could win this game, then it's gone. They can't. What do they say then?
Well, first of all, I'm glad you brought it up because sometimes people forget there were chances and plenty of them and a lot of good opportunities. I think back to 2015 with Wisconsin, had a lead against Duke and lost it late. Even the year before, I thought they were the best team in 2014 before Harrison's 3 over Josh Gasser for Wisconsin. They had multiple chances. Michigan, Illinois, Michigan State's been in this game multiple times. So it's been right there. But here, if you're going to win it, if you're Purdue, you have to go through, as you said, the best team, the team that won it last year. So I actually think if they win it, it would be even sweeter for the conference to get past Connecticut, this Connecticut team, to get a championship for Purdue and the league.
Could not agree more. So how do they do it? We're going to talk about that here coming up throughout the show. But for now, let's send it back to Mike in Chicago.
Dave, thanks. And March Madness tweeted out the fact that, yes, first time in 55 years, the Boilers are in the national championship game with a chance to wear that crown for the first time ever. And it has been a great program. I thought it was interesting those guys were talking about the fact that, you know, in the Big Ten, you understand how good this program has been. Yep. I want to know what you think is at stake in this game for Purdue, because I would argue, to follow up on that, this is a great opportunity for the national perspective of Purdue to lift up the program to where I think you think, and most of us around here believe it belongs. It is in that top 15, top 10 program caliber.
Yeah, it should be in the national discussion. I spent a lot of time talking to Lewis Jackson about this, a former point guard at Purdue University. He feels like Purdue is reaching that upper echelon of college basketball, and I agree with you. But you got to have that national championship, and I agree with the guys. You hear Mike, you hear Andy, you hear those guys talk about Purdue being the leader in Big Ten championships in the Big Ten. That is tough to do, but no one talks about it nationally. No one gives Coach Painter that credit. So if Coach Painter is able to come away with this this NCAA championship, a national championship, on top of winning back-to-back Big Ten championship, it puts Purdue, Coach Painter, Zach Edey in that greatness category that they definitely deserve to be in.
What does it do for Matt Painter? Because I would argue, in that same way that I'm thinking for this program, it felt like the one thing for the last, 5, 6, 7 years that was missing from Painter's resume was a Final Four. And I remember saying, he's got to get over that hurdle for the casual fan to realize he's a nationally elite coach. He's done that now,
Yep.
but 40 more minutes, what could be waiting for him on the other side?
I mean, he'll be solidified as one of the greatest coaches in college basketball. I think when you talk to college basketball minds, some of the greatest coaches that's coached the game, they give Coach Painter his credit. You hear Coach Wright talk about it. Coach Painter, his mind, his offensive mind, being able to put the defensive schemes he puts out there. He deserves to be in the conversation, but a championship, it validates it. It puts him in a group that you can no longer take him out of. It's no longer a discussion of who the better coaches in the Big Ten are across the country. I think when you think of coaches in that 50 age range, that 50 and down range, Coach Painter is the leader of that group. He is the next great coach in college basketball. You think about overall in this championship, it'll give him that validation for sure.
What's interesting, too, you think of how many national titles does Tom Izzo have? One.
Yep.
And yet he gets the benefit of the doubt because people know that he's won a national championship. Exactly. So then you add up all those Sweet 16s, you add up all those Big Ten championships, tournament championships, and you see this whole perspective, and it's, oh, what a beautiful picture it's painted. And Matt Painter's kind of done the opposite way, right?
Yep.
He's picked up all those other things that aren't necessarily nationally seen, but you're in the Final Four this year, your chance to be a national champion, that'll change the way he's seen forever.
Oh, no, for sure. Then you think about how Coach Painter's built it. He's got his guys involved. You look at Purdue and some of the guys that they have been supporting the program, from guys back in the 90s coming to the Final Four, to Etwan Moore and the Baby Boilers, to my years, to Carson Edwards, Jay Knivey and those guys. They built a program. So now you win a national championship, you're going to start to get better recruits. You're going to start to get those guys that are going to play at the next level. And what that does is it takes your program to the very next level. When you start to get those NBA guys in that locker room, the guys that want to compete at the highest level but going to play at the highest level with the alum support that he has, with the school support that he has, it truly could turn Purdue into putting them in the conversation. They win this one, they get a couple more Final Fours, they get back to this position. We could be looking at a future blue blood.
And to do it from the position of 1 year removed from losing in the 116 game and having no momentum at all and possible mental hurdles for them to then do that would be something else. The guys were also talking about the Big Ten perspective, what it would do for the league. What do you believe a victory tonight would do for the conference?
I'll be big time. Since I left the conference in 2016, it seems like everyone in the nation has been down on the Big Ten. 2018 was a great year. 2019 was a great year. But the next 4 years, next 5 years, the league has struggled. The NCAA success has not been there, and that's what has led the conference to have this perception that it isn't as great nationally. But I think a Purdue championship over a team of the caliber of UConn, pros on that team, Donovan, Clingan, Trisha Newton, the best point guard in the country, it will really show that the Big Ten is not a conference to play with. We are still the best conference in college basketball, and everything through the nation runs through the Big Ten.
Again, so many really good teams, so many close chances, but they've come up just short every single time since 2000. We're just a few hours away from seeing if Purdue can erase that mark on the conference sheet. Much more from the men's Final Four. Our crew breaks down all the angles coming up on this Purdue and UConn matchup. Plus, to the women's side we go. Meghan McKeown on the final stop for the Hawkeyes, and what's still to come for Iowa and for the Big Ten. And the Iowa season comes to a close due to a loss to South Carolina, a team they beat last year in the NCAA tournament, but literally a different team. 5 brand new starters for the Gamecocks this year versus then. The big difference, perhaps, they had depth and they had shooters. 8 3-pointers made in 1 less attempt, 4 3-pointers made the year before in 1 more attempt. So for more on this, we're happy to bring in my good buddy Meghan McKeown, who is joining us from on the road, where she is at all times, really, these days. Meghan, let's first off talk about the game. I want to get your analysis on it. And looking back to me, if you're going to beat South Carolina, you need to be borderline perfect, right? And they got way out-rebounded, and they missed 15 shots at the rim, the Iowa Hawkeyes did. What stood out to you?
Well, to start the game, I thought Iowa looked great to go out on a 10-0 run. Caitlin Clark went on a run herself at one point in that quarter. Iowa came out and threw the first punch. I was curious to see how South Carolina was going to try to slow them down. Teams that beat Iowa are the teams that can slow them down, force them to play in the 70s, even 60s, and then make moves. Now, Iowa came out throwing the first punch. I loved the adjustments they made as well when it came to man-to-man defense, going zone, kind of going back and forth to keep South Carolina off rhythm. The issue that teams have run into all year long with the Gamecocks is they have depth, size, and can rebound the ball at a high level. Malaysia Fulwiley comes off the bench and absolutely provides a dominant spark. Nobody on Iowa could stay in front of her. She is elite at getting to the basket, and that opened up so much more for South Carolina in terms of getting the ball inside to Camelia Cardosa, and the chip started to fall, if you will, for Iowa. South Carolina, too much depth, too much size. There's a reason why they went undefeated all season long, but it does not take away from the fact that Iowa, after getting to the national championship last year, somehow finds a way to get back there this year with so many new pieces when it comes to the fabric of their DNA. What a remarkable run for the Hawkeyes.
Agreed. And you think of how truly incredible Monica Czinano was. She'll go down as one of the all-time great post players in Big Ten history, and they didn't have her on this team. And it's not like they went out to the transfer portal and brought in somebody else. So for them to still get back with their young players gaining experience, with their older players taking steps forward, it's pretty amazing. And I want to talk about one of those older players right now with you. Obviously, the vast majority of the attention this season has been on Caitlin Clark, as it should be. There's no one like her in the history of the sport. But Kate Martin is really special, and this tournament really put a spotlight on her. When they needed scoring, she would get it. She had this pull-up jumper, this turnaround mid-range. She would drive in the LSU game when they needed tough drives, and she would get layups. And we always know the leadership factor has been there. In 10 years, we're going to be talking about how she's coaching one of these Final Four teams. I'm sure about it. What do you think about what Kate Martin meant to this year's team in particular?
If Kate Martin was on any other team in the Big Ten, she would likely be the star and somebody that we were constantly talking about. But because you're on a team with Caitlin Clark, you don't necessarily get all of the outside attention that you deserve. Kate Martin was the ultimate X factor for Iowa and was the X factor her whole entire career there. Her toughness, the little things that don't necessarily show up in the stat sheet. Kate Martin grew up playing football. I mean, she knows what it's like to get down and be physical and not have an issue with the contact that comes with, being a basketball player. And she was the person that really allowed everybody else to get into their spots and be themselves and complete their roles. Kate Martin's role on this team, words can't even describe what she did. She understood how to allow Caitlin Clark to be Caitlin Clark and set the tone as a leader for the rest of her teammates to understand how to play with Caitlin Clark. It's not necessarily an easy task. As basketball players, we come in from high school, go to college, and we all want to be the star. We all want to score the points. She understood her role. Martin let everybody else understand their roles. And the little things she did, she became a better three-point shooter over the course of her career. She became a really good ball handler. She became one of the hardest people to box out. She created so many second chance opportunities off of offensive rebounds. All these little things that are kind of like the dirty work that people don't always want to do. Kate Martin took it on with pride. And she is one of the biggest reasons why Iowa has had success over the course of the last 4 years.
And again, the focus will be on Clark. My next question to you is about Clark, but to overlook the impact that Martin and Gabby Marshall in particular had on this team would be a mistake. They were incredibly valuable members all season long, all careers long for them in Iowa City. That being said, Caitlin Clark's time in college is done. We're a week away from her going #1 overall in the WNBA draft. When you look back, Meghan, and it can be from this season or any point in the last 4 years, what do you think in a few years will be the first memory from her college career that will pop up for you?
Mike, I was fortunate enough to be on the call when she broke Kelsey Plum's all-time scoring record in women's basketball. And that was one of the coolest things to witness because she did it in 2 minutes and 12 seconds. It was unbelievable. She scored 8 straight points. It's all she needed to get the record. But I look back and I think, calling her first ever game with Lisa Byington right here on the Big Ten Network against Northwestern, where she was held to a career low 8 points. I can't believe that ended up being the lowest amount of points that she would score in her career. She'd go on to score in double figures in every single college game. I think just about being around Iowa's team and seeing how Caitlin interacted with her teammates, like she's a great person and handled so much pressure and attention as a young person, probably better than most people would be able to handle it. On the court, the logo threes, the jaw-dropping plays, the passes, the no-looks, the behind the backs, all of those things will go down in history. But the way she has handled all of this and carried herself with so much pressure and all eyes on her has been one of the most impressive things I've ever seen.
A little bit later on in the show, we'll air this special retrospective piece that I wrote on Clark, so you're going to want to stick around to watch that. That being said, Meghan, it is time to turn the page, and for the Iowa Hawkeyes, they're looking already to next year. It's a different world. The transfer portal will change things, so we can't tell you 100% what the Iowa roster will look like next year. But I'm thinking you saw the steps forward that Hannah Stuelke took this season. Sydney Falter went from a nice player to a starter in the NCAA tournament and the Final Four. Her rebounding stepped up, her aggression stepped up, her scoring stepped up. What will the Iowa team look like, as much as you can tell right now, for next season?
Well, Sydney Falter is somebody that deserves all the flowers because of how she stepped up to the plate throughout the month of March. Molly Davis went down on senior day for Iowa. I wasn't sure what they were going to look like without one of their starters who they'd played really well with all year, and Davis was playing at such a high level. Sydney Falter seamlessly steps into that starting spot and starts scoring at a high level. She was doing great coming off the bench, rebounding and doing all of the little things as a role player. But then over the month of March in this Big Ten tournament and NCAA tournament run, she was scoring the ball, getting out in transition, the beneficiary of many Caitlin Clark passes on the run. She was knocking down open threes at a high level, defending, diving on the floor for loose balls. So many little things. Sydney Falter is such a complete player in terms of being on the wing and understanding how to run in Lisa Bluter's system. Hannah Stuelke, what can be said? She had 47, 48, 49 points earlier this season. Unbelievable player, one of the best post players in the Big Ten. And I can't wait to see how she continues to grow in terms of her skill development and ability to play with her back to the basket. One of the most skilled players in the Big Ten. And then I'm curious to see who's going to step up into that point guard role moving forward. Taylor McCabe for Iowa is a sharp shooter, somebody who has handled the ball at times for them. But, got to look at the freshman class coming in, what's going to happen in the transfer portal. Unfortunately, so many outside factors still in the month of April before we know what we're going to see. But if you have Sydney Falter and Hannah Stuelke on this roster moving forward, Iowa's going to be in good shape.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up the freshman class. I think 4 or 5 top 100 ranked commits are going to be in Iowa City next year. Before I let you go, Meghan, how do you wrap up this season for the Big Ten? Iowa making it to the national championship game. You had Indiana and Ohio State hosting NCAA tournament games. Illinois won the WBIT. Minnesota made it to the title game of the WNIT. What was this year like as a whole for the league?
This year was one of the most competitive years in the league to date. To think that 12 Big Ten teams went to postseason tournaments, that is absolutely unheard of and great opportunities for everybody who participated. But I look at the NCAA tournament and the teams that were able to make some runs. I look at this Ohio State team, even though their NCAA tournament dreams were cut short in the round of 32, they were still such a dominant team. To win the Big Ten Conference outright was huge, especially with an Iowa team that went all the way to the national championship game. Mackenzie Holmes and Indiana, what didn't they do? Like, just such a fun, disciplined team to watch. Sarah Scalia, another great player who won the 3-point shooting contest, by the way, down at the men's Final Four. You look at so many of these teams and the great players in the Big Ten that built a legacy and left the programs better than when they came in. It's really special to see the leaps and bounds the Big Ten made this year. Once again, one of the best conferences and one of the most competitive conferences in the country. And it is scary to think what we're going to be talking about next year when you add in the West Coast teams.
Yeah, like 2 seed in the NCAA tournament UCLA, 1 seed in the NCAA tournament USC with Juju Watkins. It's going to be a blast. Take a few months off. Get ready for it. Meghan McKeown, always great. Thanks for your time.
Thanks, pal.
So the matchup of the bigs, Zach Edey and Donovan Clingan, looks like this. The numbers have some similarities, but Edey plays a lot more minutes, scores way more points, gets a bunch more rebounds. Give Clingan credit, though. He is a monster defensively, doubling up the amount of blocks per game that Edey has. By the way, these are just the numbers from the last 5 games for each guys, all NCAA tournament guys. All NCAA tournament games, I should say. Back out to our crew out in Arizona.
Thank you, Mike. The matchup tonight is one that will be big, literally and figuratively. We speak of the 2 big men in the middle Zach Edey and Donovan Clingan. Amazingly, it's the first matchup in the history of the NCAA tournament at any point in the tournament with players 7'2" or taller. First in the championship game of 7 feet or taller since Hakeem Olajuwon. This is before he was Hakeem, went up against Patrick Ewing 40 years ago. This is, in many ways, the focal point here. What are you watching between these two?
Well, Zach Edey is fundamental to everything that Purdue does well. He's not their only terrific player, but it all begins with him. Everything revolves around him. His presence on the floor, something I talked about after the game on Saturday, he never leaves. If he can avoid leaving the floor, he never leaves, and that's astonishing for a player his size. Big guys usually need time away from the floor. Will he be able to do that with Clingan, who is 7'2" and carries a lot of weight and a lot of strength, and maybe will wear on him a little bit? Well, he did it with DJ Burns, and so I think he can do it in this game. His presence is essential, but he also has to be able to get good, solid position and be able to maneuver, and he has to watch for the real extreme quickness that UConn brings with their defensive help. These are the quickest defenders he'll have faced in a while.
The big man is back. You know, this whole narrative that the big man is no longer someone who plays in the post. They're all the Euro bigs out there. Well, for this game, for this season, for these two players, they like being in the post. And I had the pleasure to talk to Ralph Sampson on Sunday, who was the last back-to-back winner of the Naismith Award in the early 80s. And he was telling me that he loves the fact that, first of all, we've got 7'2" versus 7'4", that they're a little bit different. You know, Clingan can run the floor a little bit more effectively than Zach Edey. Zach Edey's stronger than Clingan. Clingan better shot blocker, but Zach Edey's certainly more imposing. And he brought up an interesting point to your point about the quickness of UConn's guards is Zach Edey's going to really have to watch bringing the ball down.
Yeah.
Because NC State was effective at different points of the game, really trying to swipe at it, and UConn will do the same. And so he's got to really try to keep that ball up high to be effective. To, you know, if they're going to trap, score, kick it out, but he's going to really deal with sort of pestering guards that are very quick with their hands. That could be a problem.
One of the things that is interesting about this matchup relative to the bigs is that Zach Edey can afford to be less aggressive than Donovan Clingan. He has very capable backups, but they're not big shot blocker guys. Samson Johnson is one of the most dynamic bigs. He may be the most dynamic big in this entire tournament. Runs, jumps, flies. And so Donovan Clingan can be a little bit more aggressive. If he gets foul trouble, it's not a crisis. He missed almost an entire month, and Samson Johnson filled in, and they did not lose a game. So that's an advantage for the Huskies. But, of course, the advantage for Purdue is that, as terrific as Clingan is, Edey's the best player in college basketball.
Right. I guess I do wonder a little bit, and this kind of dovetails with your point, Mike, is Purdue is so reliant on Edey. I mean, you look at the 5 games in the NCAA tournament, Edey has been their leading scorer in all 5 of the games. UConn has had 4 different leading scorers in their 5 games. And so if Clingan, you're not going to neutralize Zach Edey, but if Clingan can play him close to a draw, to me that bodes poorly for Purdue.
Oh, I think that's true. But I do think it's also less likely a draw. Can he limit him? Can he make it harder for him? Yes. But Clingan's not a huge point producer most of the time.
Right. I guess what I'm saying, if his defense can neutralize him.
Yeah. I mean, if you give Zach Edey a bad day, then Purdue has to shoot in maybe 15 threes to win. I think we've seen that all year. They have had very few defeats, very few games where they were really pushed. And so it's highly unlikely that you're going to be successful if you're Purdue if Zach doesn't have a great day.
As always with Zach Edey, and to some extent Clingan, how this game's officiated will be very intriguing to watch, certainly in the first few minutes. Hopefully both big men stay on the floor for as long as possible, and that the officials, aren't dictating how long they're out there.
Mike, you brought up an interesting point. We were talking about this with Robbie Hummel yesterday, too. The fact that people are looking at Donovan Clingan as a surefire top of the first round kind of pick, and there's so much vacillating about where Zach Edey might end up. Does Zach take this game personally, do you think?
Oh yeah, I mean that's how he moves himself. There's plenty of slights out there. That's the wonderful thing about me and Donovan Clingan is they keep giving you trophies, and someone behind them is saying, "Yeah, but you don't deserve it." So he always has something to motivate him. He can never feel like, "Yeah, I've got every Player of the Year award for the last 2 years, so I can rest." No, because there are so many critics of him out there. He's just tall, all of that nonsense. He has a lot of that out there, and he absolutely fuels him. It drives him to be even better than he already is.
And I think he's answered a lot of critics by his play in this tournament. You're mentioning that he's been the leading scorer. That 40-16 performance against Tennessee, it wasn't just the production. He literally played almost every second of that game, which I think answered any negativity about his conditioning. You know, look, a couple years ago, we've all documented this. I know he split the time with Travion Williams, and it made sense. Travion Williams was really good.
Right.
So they were playing basically 20-20. But I don't think he could play 38 minutes 2 years ago, or 39 or 40 minutes. So
Nor could Travion Williams.
Right. That's a big difference in his favor. The way he played in the big games, he's grabbed the moment and he's taken advantage of it. And there's no question, if you're an NBA scout or personnel director, you can't look at his performance this month and say, "Oh, he can't play at the next level." He has proved that.
Yeah, I think that's the part that people don't look at, is he moves really well, especially in the offensive side of the pick and roll. If you can move in the offensive side, then you can move in the defensive side as well. Is he going to be as great as Nikola Jokic? Almost certainly not. But that doesn't mean there's not a place for him up there.
Well, the challenge there is he's not as good a passer. And right, I mean, that's kind of the next frontier, I think, for Zach Edey. If you're going to be that big, you probably need to pass the ball better. And he struggles at times with turnovers. And I think that's the point you were making that Ralph Sampson made. I mean, he did bring the ball down. And part of that was where those bounce passes came.
Right.
Right? Like, pass it high to him so that he can keep it high. But you guys are right. I mean, those UConn guards are going to dig, and it's going to be a challenge. He's going to be surrounded in this one. But you think about the numbers he's put up, and it is mind-boggling. The national semifinal game against North Carolina State, his 6th straight game with at least 20 and 10 in the NCAA tournament. He broke a deadlock with a fella named David Robinson, who turned out okay in the NBA for the longest such streak ever. Hey, lots more on this game coming up. Mike, back to you, though, in Chicago.
Well, Dave, thanks. And we'll stay on this big man matchup. I'm really interested in what Andy sort of touched on, the concept of he made it more about the officials. I'm curious more of just where fouls are committed. We're on the same page that people can't pretend the whistle needs to be swallowed by the officials.
Right.
They have to follow the rules. You call a foul no matter when in the game it is.
Exactly.
That's important.
Exactly.
But there's going to be contact. When you have two physical bigs, there's going to be interesting contact. I'm curious how that plays out in this match.
Yeah, me too. I think you got to call it as the rules lie. You see anybody pushing up Zach Edey or even Donovan Clingan on the other side, you got to call that foul. When they're hanging on him, when they're grabbing on him, they're reaching in, they're swiping for the ball, they're getting his arm, they're hooking him. You got to call it every single time. If a guy gets in foul trouble, so be it. You got to call the game like you call it in the first half, just like you call it in that second half. Zach is going to get those calls. He's going to live at the free throw line. You may get bashed on social media if you're the referee crew, but a foul is a foul, and I'm sure Zach is going to draw a lot of fouls against UConn.
He certainly has his whole career. If he gets 18 free throw attempts in this game, he will tie the all-time record for most in a season ever.
Oh, that's crazy.
It's incredible. Just 18 away from tying that all-time mark. So as for the one-on-one matchup, how does Clingan affect Edey, and how does Edey affect Clingan?
I think you look at Zach Edey as one of the better interior defenders in the country, and the same goes with Clingan. I think Clingan, they don't throw him the ball every single time down the floor like a Purdue does to Zach Edey. So Zach is going to really have to be in tune with his ball screen defense. I can see UConn setting a bunch of middle ball screens, getting Zach Edey in space, making him move those puppies, trying to drive by him, draw some fouls that way. But on the flip side, Purdue is going to throw that ball into Zach Edey every single play. Zach Clingan has the height, he has the size. He's got to stay out of foul trouble because Zach Edey, he is going to get his numbers. He's going to go right through you. He's going to finish at the rim. UConn starts to send that double. He's going to hit teammates. They've got to have their game plan on par the entire game. If you're scraping, scrape. If you're big to big doubling, do it every time because one mistake, it's going to be a bucket for Purdue.
And I thought Mike brought up a really interesting point, too, about the depth. that they have behind Clingan. I mean, we pointed out that their minutes are not the same. Clingan plays a lot less. That's interesting. So if you're a fan at home and going, hey, let's get them in foul trouble, that'd be nice to not have Clingan in there, but it's not like their backup is nothing.
Yeah, Samson Johnson is an animal. I mean, he can block shots. He can finish at the rim. He's great in ball screen. He's just a great overall player. Next season, it's not going to be much of a drop-off when you go to him from Clingan. He is a dominant player down low, but he hasn't seen an animal like Zach Edey, like Donovan Clingan hasn't seen a guy like Zach Edey. You look at Johnson, he has a tendency to jump at shot fakes. I could see him coming into the game, Zach Edey going right at him, putting him in some foul trouble too. Those two big fellas get into some foul trouble early in this game. It could breed problems for UConn because then you have to double team, you have to scrape, and that's going to leave somebody open on the perimeter for Purdue.
I know I said I'd say this for later in the show, but if Zach Edey wins this game, what does it do for his Big Ten all-time perception?
If Zach Edey is able to win a national championship with this Purdue squad, you look at the roster, there's not another projected NBA player on this team. I think they have a couple guys that can play at the next level, but who am I? And you look at some of the guys that's won national championships in the Big Ten, the rosters that they had, the players that they played with. I think if Zach Edey is able to come away with this national championship, he will be the best player to ever play in the Big Ten. You look at guys like Jerry Lucas and that Ohio State team had 5 NBA guys on it. That Magic Johnson team had 3 NBA guys on it, and Magic Johnson wasn't the leading scorer or leading rebounder on that team. You go to Isaiah Thomas, he had 6 NBA guys on his team as a freshman, 4 NBA guys as a sophomore, won a national championship. You go to that Glenn Rice, Michigan team if you wanted to. Averaged 25 for the season, great player, but has 6 NBA guys on the roster. They are playing with pros all throughout the season. You look at Zach Edey, last season, #1 team in the country, a first-round exit, but he was the only All-American on the team, first All-Big Ten team. And you look at this season, he's raised the production from all of his teammates. He's the leading scorer in the country. If he's able to win a national championship with the team on his back, I think he's the best to ever do it.
Think about that.
It's crazy.
I mean, putting it in that perspective. And all those guys, Magic, Isaiah, Rice, they were all incredible, all-time, amazing college basketball players. But the only one you mentioned that has won the National Player of the Year twice was Jerry Lucas. So that would be another thing in the camp of Zach Edey. 2 National Player of the Years and a potential national championship. Think about that. You could be watching the greatest Big Ten player of all time in tonight's game, potentially. That being said, he can only do so much. They have to get production from the guards. The good thing is the Boilermakers have had production from the guards just about all season long. When the season began, this would have been a dream national championship game matchup. When the tournament began, it would have been a dream national championship matchup. And sure enough, 1 seed versus 1 seed, power versus power, Purdue and UConn is tonight. The thing is, UConn hasn't lost in a while. We're looking at 11 straight NCAA tournament games they have won. They're the defending national champs. If they win tonight, that will tie them with Florida for the longest streak since 2000. Back out to Phoenix we go with Dave, Mike, and Andy.
Okay, Mike, we've talked a lot about the big men in this game, but I think there's a school of thought, certainly, that this might come down to guard play, and this is a challenging guard matchup. UConn's guards are long, they are tough and physical, and let's just be honest, Purdue's guards, particularly Braden Smith, did not play well in the national semifinal. What do you see as you match up these backcourts, Mike?
Well, I think it starts at the point, obviously, and that's a real challenge for Purdue. Braden Smith is outstanding. It's not the first time he's played against size, because even if UConn decides to mismatch it and not play Tristan Newton on him, he's still going to be playing size, because he'd be playing Steph Castles, who is even taller and more dynamic than Tristan Newton is. So that's a real challenge for him. It won't be the first time he's played size. Illinois' guys, they don't have a 5'11" guy running around at Illinois in their primary rotation. So he's faced that. I think he can deal with it, but it's the best he'll have played all year. He's going to have to be more precise than he was on Saturday. He's going to have to be more anticipatory of what he might see. He did not expect that challenge at the midcourt line that he saw, and it knocked him back literally twice for over and back violations. He's got to be more ready for people throwing different things at him.
And if it is Steph Castle, I mean, Big Ten fans have seen what he has done so far. Boo Buie went 2 of 15 against him. Terrence Shannon Jr. had his worst game of the year. So he can really defend. It's a challenging matchup, no doubt.
Yeah, first of all, Castle, I don't think gets the respect he deserves as a defender. You know, obviously he's a highlight guy, and he's going to be probably in the lottery. To me, the most intriguing matchup is Lance Jones and actually Cam Spencer. And in talking to the Purdue staff, that's the matchup they're going to do. They're going to put Lance Jones on Cam Spencer. Big Ten fans, of course, are very familiar with Cam Spencer, but it's a different Cam Spencer. He's even better than he was last year at Rutgers. He's tougher. He makes big-time shots. He's got some, moxie about him. Doesn't matter. He'll basically, I don't say flip-flop, but he'll maybe, I don't know. He'll definitely get in the grill of your fan base, of your players, and they want Lance Jones on him. And if you can, to quote Raphael, shut off that water, then that's a big plus for Purdue if Cam Spencer doesn't get hot from the perimeter.
Yeah, and if you do that, that puts Fletcher Lawyer onto Steph Castle, and that's an interesting conundrum for the Boilers. Fletcher played better defensively on Saturday. I thought he was very capable in that game. He did not get burned in that game. But Castle is so dynamic. He will have to find a way to stay in between Castle and the basket. I thought Fletcher played really well on Saturday at both ends of the floor. This would be his biggest challenge yet.
And Castle hadn't had a great offensive NCAA tournament until the Alabama game, when he was tremendous, and it felt like that was Alabama's strategy to a certain extent. They kind of dared Castle to beat him, and I don't want to say he beat them, but he certainly played a major role in them being beaten.
Yeah, and so I think it's pick your poison. And maybe they start out Lance Jones on Cam Spencer, and if they think Spencer's a little off, but Castle gets hot, maybe they flip it. I mean, obviously Matt Painter and the staff will adjust, but I think it's interesting that they're looking at Spencer, and statistically, that's what it would tell you. He's the better shooter. Let's put our better defender on him to start this game.
Also, remember, there are two very dynamic freshmen on the Purdue bench. Cam Edey has played a lot of basketball in this tournament as a defense-first guy, and so that would be a player that I could see absolutely getting into this game and making a difference for the Boilers.
That's one thing that to me is really interesting, because we always think of how massive Purdue is. That's really about Zach Edey. Trey Kaufman-Renn obviously brings a lot of size too, but I think if you look at the rest of these lineups, UConn has a significant size advantage at all the other positions. You can neutralize that with Edey, because he does bring a lot of length and a lot of athleticism.
And one other player for UConn we didn't mention that could be a problem for Braden Smith is Hassan Diarra, because when he comes in the game, that gives them a different look. He's a little quicker, and so Smith may have to deal with Diarra and Newton at times, and so he's going to have his hands full. There's no question about it.
Yeah, it is a player that in DR who's terrific, but is more Braden speed. I mean,
Yes.
he's seen lots of that. He can look Hassan DR in the eye and say, "Hey, I've done more than you. You may have a ring, but I've been a big time player in a big time league."
Fascinating matchups across the board in this one. Again, cannot wait for it to tip off later tonight. Lots more coverage coming up here, Mike, as we continue to break it down, talk about the significance of this one from the Boilermakers' perspective. But let's send it back to you now in Chicago.
Well, it is a meeting tonight of the top two teams in Ken Pomeroy's ratings, UConn and Purdue. That is not something that happens all the time. In fact, in the last decade, it's only happened twice. For more on this, we go back out to site in Arizona with our crew.
All right, Mike, as we continue our coverage here from Glendale, counting down to a mammoth matchup later tonight between Connecticut and Purdue, with a national championship on the line. And Andy, you made an interesting point earlier that I want you to elaborate on. Purdue is clearly the underdog in this game, and you were mentioning there were two other times this year where technically they were the underdog, the road game against Illinois, the neutral site game against Arizona. But I don't think in either one of those games anyone went into it and said, wow, I'd really be surprised were Purdue to win. I do think to a certain extent that's the perception of this game. How do you think that impacts them going into it?
Well, I would say we go back over a year for this core Purdue group. I can't remember the last time they weren't expected to win, whatever the line was and all that business. I mean, when they were expected to win. In the Big Ten, Purdue has had that target on their back, a sellout crowd, every single game. And they've handled it. They've lost some of them, but they've walked into it. They've never been overwhelmed by the moment. I don't expect that to happen. I think they kind of got those jitters out on Saturday night. Now, conversely, This UConn team, same deal. They've gone on the road in the Big East. They're the big draw. Target's on their back. So it's a little equal, but I do think the pressure is on UConn, whether or not they feel it more than Purdue, to repeat as champs. They've been the dominant team. They've been the expected champ. Whereas Purdue, and I said this earlier, I feel like getting to this game doesn't mean that they've accomplished what they've needed to, but the monkey's off their back. Now, in talking to Zach Edey on Sunday, he's as locked in as ever. The job's not done. And also what we've seen in their locker rooms, they're not using the water gun and dumping water. They actually kind of casually place the sticker on the bracket. So they've not been euphoric to this point. They will if they win tonight.
Well, I look at with Purdue the fact that most coaches love to have the ability to say nobody believes in us. And Dan Hurley even said that the national media doesn't believe in UConn. I mean, he said it before the tournament. So, and I was like, what national media? Come on. They're absolutely not true. But now Purdue can go into the locker room. Matt Painter, his staff can say, nobody thinks we're going to win this game. He can show the different people that picks. If he wants to go into the betting market, he can. If he doesn't have to, because there's plenty of people out there online that are saying this is UConn's game. And so he can say that with a straight face, and the players will know it's true, and they can rally around that. Do you need extra motivation to win a championship? Sometimes, yeah, you do, because I watched them in that Tennessee game. I was in Detroit, and I always have thought Purdue is a hard-playing program. They are a hard-playing program. But that whole Spinal Tap thing from the movie Spinal Tap where the amp goes to 11, they were at 11 that day. I think they'll be at 11 tonight.
It's one louder is what it is. It's going to be loud in there tonight. We talk about Matt Painter and what buttons he might push. What could this night mean for Matt Painter?
Well, he would have done what no Purdue coach has ever done. He would have done what no Big Ten coach has done in 24 years. I've always believed, known. Matt Painter is one of the best coaches in college basketball, but not everybody believes that because you have to have this or you have to have that. If he has a title, no more questions.
Well, think about two coaches who are now in the Hall of Fame. They were always on that list of best coaches to never win a championship or even get to a Final Four. One was the late John Chaney, and the other one was Gene Cady. And both in the Hall of Fame, but neither one got to the Final Four. And now Matt Painter's gone. I think he's had a Hall of Fame career, but now there won't be any asterisk with getting to the Final Four. Gets a championship, that seals the deal. And he also is someone who is so highly regarded and respected by his peers. Everyone likes to see Matt Painter succeed. He's on all these committees. He is, a cerebral guy within the game. He's helped change the game. He's a deep thinker. But I don't know anyone that doesn't like him personally. And I think if he wins this championship, all these guys that do this profession, up and down, D1, D2, T3, are going to be happy for him.
I think that's one thing that's really cool, and I don't know if the kind of general public knows this, but the Final Four doubles as the coaches' convention. So every coach in the sport is here, and obviously through the years of covering this, we've all gotten to know coaches really well, and I had a bunch of them sitting right behind me, and just speaking to each and every one of them on Saturday. No one's rooting for anyone. They're certainly not rooting against Dan Hurley, but so many of his peers would love to see Matt Painter win a national championship, and again, he gets a chance to do that tonight. Final thoughts from here for now, coming up in just a little bit. Mike, though, we send it back to you in Chicago.
Well, Dave, thanks. And earlier on, you guys had a chance to chat about the guard play in this game. We didn't get Raphael's opportunity to chat about that. We're going to do that right now. And I feel like they don't need the Boilermaker guards to be red hot or to have their greatest game of all time.
Right.
They just can't be cold.
Exactly.
They can't come out and miss their first 7 or 8 3-pointers from the guard spot. They don't have to go 7 of 8, but you can't go 0 of 8.
Yeah, they just got to do their job with shooting the basketball. You need Fletcher Loyer to be the 40% three-point shooter he is, and that's 2 for 5 from the three-point line. If he can go 4 for 7, that'd be great for Fletch. You get Lance Jones to knock down the open ones, and then I think it's key. I think it's imperative when you look at Purdue's bench. Miles Colvin, Mason Gillis, Cam Heidi, if they're able to come into this basketball game and give them production from the guard spot, off of the bench, maybe make 4 or 5 threes as a collective, that's when Purdue is at their best. When they're knocking down shots, it's huge for them. It gives Zach Edey that entire middle to work with. But it's not just making shots for the guards. They got to take care of the basketball. You know UConn is smelling blood right now with Stephon Castle and Tristan Newton. They're going to pressure the basketball, get up into them. Purdue has got to make shots. They got to take care of the basketball. And then they got to dominate the offensive glass, which we know them to do.
You know, we've talked for the whole year about what's different between Purdue this year and last year. And the biggest thing is the guard play. Lance Jones brings experience and intelligence. Braden Smith has upped his game tremendously this year from last year as a freshman. However, Braden Smith did not have a good game at all the last game. He had multiple turnovers. He went 1 of 9 shooting from the field. On the scale of 0 to freak out, where are you as you watch Braden Smith entering this game?
Oh, 0. I know Brandon Smith for a couple years now, and I've been around him. If it's a guy I trust with the basketball in his hands at this point in the season, it's Brandon Smith, especially after having a bad game. Great players, good players, guys with that grit, they bounce back really quickly. They get off of the canvas, and I expect Brandon Smith to be the greatest version of Greatest Smith that we've seen this season. He's going to be aggressive off of that ball screen, getting to that right hand, making plays at the rim, shooting that pull-up, getting his teammates involved. It's going to be key that Braden Smith dials in on a defensive end. You need Braden Smith, Fletcher Lawyer, you need those guys to guard their yard because that's been a big difference from this year's Purdue team to previous teams. You look at their defensive numbers, you look at KenPom. This is the first time in 4 or 5 seasons that Purdue has had a top 15 defense. They've really got to show to play in this one, especially on the perimeter.
Well, what do you think whether it's the players or the coaching staff were saying to Braden in that game yesterday? Because I mean, it's not just that he didn't shoot the ball well. In a minute span, he had 2 backcourt violations. We don't see that from sophomore Braden Smith. Maybe you saw it in glimpses from last year, but we haven't seen that this year. So how do you think the team was handling that?
I know Coach Painter is telling him to calm down, relax, get into the flow of the game. But one of my former teammates is on staff now, P.J. Thompson. And I know for fact, P.J. Thompson went over to Braden Smith, said, "You're having the worst basketball game of your life, and we are still up 6. So just relax." And then what does Braden Smith come out there and do? He comes out and hit that dagger three-pointer off of the ball screen to really seal the deal for the Boilers. When your staff believes in you, when your coaches are fighting for you, when they're telling you to calm down, even through your worst moments, you're going to be okay. That's what gives you the confidence that Braden Smith will be fine in this game against UConn. I expect him to take that challenge against Tristan Newton, the Bob Cousy Award winner, and really go at him and really go toe-to-toe with one of the best guards in the country.
It's funny, so much attention is on Clingan and Edey, and yet it very well might be Jones and Smith and Lawyer who are the most important players on the floor if Purdue's going to get a victory. Will those guys be keys to this game from Raphael? We will get you those coming up in a matter of moments. And when we come back, final thoughts from our crew out in Arizona. I mean, UConn really is a juggernaut team. They have never lost in a national championship game. And the 5-0 record, by the way, all of those have come within the last 25 years. They are a blue blood program. Nowadays, they're right up there at the top with Duke and North Carolina, etc. How can Purdue beat them? For the final thoughts, we go back out to Arizona.
Okay, Mike, wrapping things up for now from Glendale. Obviously, we have an entire pregame show coming up later today. But guys, just kind of final thoughts here. And I want to put it to you this way, Mike. If Purdue were to win this game, what would it look like? What does Purdue have to do to win?
Well, I think it starts with Zach Edey having a dominant game, whether that means 20-14 or 30-15 or whatever. He has to be outstanding. Low turnovers, great three-point shooting, and a capable defensive performance, getting big stops. You're not shutting down UConn. Nobody gets shut down at this level of the tournament. Championship games, it's very rare that you see a team not score. So it's going to have to be a big stop environment. You need to be able to get the big stop. I think Purdue is capable of doing that against this UConn team.
Yeah, I mean, just to piggyback off of that, I mean, Clingan can get in foul trouble. Let's see if that happens. And as effective as Samson Johnson can be, that might be a better matchup for Zach Edey over the long haul. He's got to stay on the floor like he did against Tennessee. I think Lance Jones will have to hit key shots like he did on Saturday night. As you said, low turnovers. But there's no question, I'm not breaking news here. UConn has the ability to win by double figures. I do not think Purdue does. If Purdue wins, I think we're looking at a late possession, single-digit victory for the Boilermakers.
Well, UConn has won every single one of its NCAA tournament games by double figures over the last 2 years. So this is what they do to people, yes.
But, big but, this is the first time that UConn will go against a number 1 seed in the last 2 NCAA tournaments. So it's equal footing here, and they have not faced that. And I know you got to play who's in front of you, but they have not faced that.
One thing I'd like to say is, for as much as we've talked about UConn's dominance, look at Purdue in this tournament.
Right.
Look at the Utah State game where they're playing walk-ons. Look at Gonzaga.
Absolutely.
The Tennessee game was competitive, but they owned the final 5 minutes. They have been look at NC State, they win by 20. It's been a dominant team as well. Maybe not as beautiful as UConn, but still overpowering.
Well, what's interesting is you combine the scoring margins of these two teams so far in the NCAA tournament. It's the largest combined scoring margin for two teams in an NCAA championship game ever, based on how they performed to this point in the tournament. So again, is UConn higher? Yes, they are higher. But Purdue is right there, and Purdue's outscored its opponents by nearly 100 points so far in the NCAA tournament. Should be fantastic tonight, and we will be here to get you ready. We've got a pregame show coming your way, 7 p.m. Eastern time. Can't wait for that. For now, though, Mike, back to you in Chicago.
Gentlemen, we'll hear from you later on this evening and later on in this show. In our final few minutes, Raphael will come back with me to give his most important keys to victory for Purdue tonight. That's next. So Purdue's in the national championship game, and here's a list of Big Ten teams to play in the national championship game going back to 2001. Now, all the teams on the left, the Big Ten teams, lost in these national championship games. Do you notice a trend on the right? All the teams that won were all 1 seeds, which goes back to one of the things we've talked about, Raphael, for a long time. People say, well, why has the Big Ten struggled in the NCAA tournament, specifically getting a national champion? Partly the tournament is random, right? It's a one and done. It doesn't necessarily always have the best team win it all. Partly it's just dumb luck sometimes. There have been national championship games where your opponent is a 4 seed or is a 10 seed or something. And for the Big Ten, it happens to be always a 1 seed. What is tonight's opponent? Again, the number 1 overall seed in UConn.
Yeah, no, I think the Big Ten, you think about the last national championship games that they've been in, all have been against stout competition. Teams that not just are competitive at the college ranks, but have guys that go on at a pro level and really affect the NBA game. You look at some of these teams that they lost to, the players that they played against, these are NBA stars at some level. So I think with Big Ten, they've run into some juggernauts. I think this is the season to do it. You look at the way Purdue is playing, the guys on their roster, how hard they play on both ends. I think this is a year that Purdue, the Big Ten, can finally get over that hump.
Well, it is really interesting, too. One of the other reasons people have given for why the Big Ten has struggled is the argument is too much of a commitment to a traditional old-school big man.
There you go.
But if Purdue wins today, that argument feels pretty flawed. That Edey guy is a fairly big guy.
That's funny.
Give me your overall keys. What does Purdue have to do tonight to win?
You got to rebound the basketball. That's the first step when you play against Connecticut. They are going to crash the offensive glass. They can break your back if you let them on that offensive glass. When the shot goes up, UConn is sending 5 guys to the offensive glass. So Purdue, one of the better rebounding teams in the country, you get that defensive rebound, and you got to use that as an opportunity to go. Get out in transition, knowing how UConn crashes. That's the first step there. The second step is take care of the basketball. Purdue, they can win when they have high turnovers, but they've lost games when they get into that 15, 16, 17 turnover range. They got to take care of the basketball from the perimeter. Defensively, their guards have got to guard their yard. I look at someone in particular like a Fletcher Lawyer, whether it's Cam Spencer or a Stephon Castle, he's got to be able to keep that basketball in front, keep those guys out of the lane, making plays for others, and then the bench has got to make plays. You got bench production, you got perimeter defense, rebounding, and take care of the basketball. If Purdue can do all 4 of those things, I think they are national champions.
It's a tall task in beating a very good team, but remember, UConn's looking across the court and going, this is a tall task for us, too.
Exactly.
There's some really, really talented players on this Purdue team. The parts are bigger when they're together than they would be individually. And I will say something Andy said in the last segment I don't think I agree with. He said if UConn wins, it could be a blowout. If Purdue wins, it's only going to be in a last-second close game.
Oh, no.
I don't think that's possible.
No.
I think that is possible. I also think it's absolutely possible Purdue could win by 3-4 possessions in this game.
I mean, you go back to that Kansas-UConn game. UConn only scores in the 50s, in the 60s points. Purdue's defense is that stout. They can do that to you. They can put the grips on you defensively. You look throughout this tournament, no team has scored 70-plus points on Purdue. They can do that to you. And then offensively, they can score with anybody in the country. And I understand UConn can really score at a high level, but Purdue is one of the better three-point shooting teams in the country. Top 2. And if they start making shots from deep all over the floor, guys are giving them production off of the bench. Zach Edey's going down low inside. They're making their free throws. Offensive rebounds is going. Purdue can beat anybody. They can beat anybody by 20 points. This team is dominant. They've been dominant all season long. This could go either way. It's not a game where Purdue is the underdog. We feel like they're the underdog. They're the underdog by the numbers, but we feel like they can win this game.
Now I'm curious about you.
Yes.
You're not playing in this game.
I'm not.
But this is the biggest game of your life to watch as a fan. Where are you going to be? What are you going to do? Are you going to tell people to shut up? You just need to focus and hone in?
Yes, I actually put on my NCAA tournament watch from 2015, the season after we finished last place in the Big Ten. I mean, this is going to be big time. You see the Purdue fans already lining up at the arena at 5:30 this morning. I mean, this is a big-time day for all Boilermakers. I'm going to lock myself in a room, turn the sound down, turn some music on, and try to enjoy it the best I can.
Oh, man. It would be very cool for Matt Painter, for Zach Edey, for you, for Hummel, for Gene. I mean, all the people who've been so important to this Purdue program, and we're a handful of hours from seeing if it happens. Pre-game show coming your way 6 o'clock Central Time, post-game 10:30 Central. For Raphael, I'm Mike. We'll see you later.